The small town of Pine Grove was quiet as always that summer evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink. Everything was normal until a bright light appeared in the sky. Old Mrs. Thompson was the first to see it while watering her garden. She looked up and dropped her watering can. The light was getting bigger and bigger. It wasn't a plane or a star. It was something else. "Martha, Martha, come look at this," she called to her neighbor. Soon, more people came out of their houses, all pointing at the strange light in the sky. The light moved slowly and gracefully, unlike any aircraft they had ever seen. It circled the town once, twice, and then started to descend. The object was now clearly visible. A silver ship about the size of a small car, with no wings but smooth curved edges that glowed with a soft blue light. The ship landed gently in the town square, right next to the old oak tree. No one dared to move. Some people took out their phones to record, while others held their children close. The police chief, who had just arrived, stood with his hand on his gun, not sure what to do. Then, with a soft humming sound, a door opened in the side of the ship. Steam came out, making it hard to see clearly. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall and elegant. As the steam cleared, everyone gasped. It was a woman, but not quite like any woman they had ever seen. Her skin had a slight silvery shine to it, and her long hair seemed to float as if she was underwater. She wore simple white clothes that looked both foreign and familiar. But what made everyone stare was her eyes. They were completely purple, like two beautiful amethysts. But she wasn't alone. Holding her hand was a small child, about 5 years old. The child looked different. While the woman was clearly not human, the child seemed to be a mix of both worlds. The little one had normal human eyes, but they changed color like mood rings. Their skin had just a hint of their mother's silver shine, and their hair moved slightly in the breeze, just like regular human hair. The woman looked around carefully, like she was searching for something or someone. The child stayed close to her, curious but shy. Then the woman pulled out what looked like an old photograph from her pocket. She showed it to a teenage boy who was standing nearby. "David Anderson," she said in a clear voice. "Where?" The boy pointed down Main Street. "The blue house with the white fence. About 5 minutes that way." The woman smiled and nodded. It was a beautiful smile, but there was sadness in it too. She held her child's hand tighter and started walking in that direction. The crowd moved apart to let them pass, still staring in amazement. As they walked down Main Street, people followed at a distance, whispering to each other. Some remembered 5 years ago, when strange lights had been seen over David Anderson's farm. There had been government people asking questions back then too. The woman and child stopped in front of the blue house. The white fence needed a new coat of paint, and the garden was a bit wild, but the nameplate was still there, David Anderson, in big bronze letters. The woman touched the letters gently, like she was touching an old memory. A tear rolled down her cheek, glowing slightly in the evening light. The child looked up at her. "Mama," the child said, "is this where Daddy lives?" The woman nodded, wiping away her tear. "Yes, Sky, this is where your father lives." She took a deep breath and walked up to the front door. The crowd had grown bigger now, but everyone was quiet. They could all feel that they were about to witness something important. The woman raised her hand to knock, then paused. She looked down at her child, who gave her an encouraging smile. That seemed to give her strength. She straightened her back, held her child's hand firmly, and knocked 3 times on the door. For a moment, everything was silent. Then footsteps could be heard from inside the house. They got closer and closer. The door handle turned slowly. And that's when everyone realized that life in their small town was about to change forever. 5 years earlier, David Anderson was having the strangest night of his life. It started with his animals acting weird. First, his chickens refused to go into their coop. Then his old dog Max wouldn't stop barking at the sky, Even the cows were mooing more than usual. He was about to go back inside when he saw it, a streak of blue fire across the night sky. Whatever it was heading straight for his backfield. David watched in amazement as the object crashed through his cornfield, leaving a trail of glowing blue plants behind it. Most people would have called the police right away. But David wasn't most people. Ever since he lost his parents, he'd lived alone on this farm, and he'd learned to trust his gut. Something told him this was important. Grabbing his flashlight and first aid kit, his mother had always said better safe than sorry, David headed into the cornfield. The path of broken corn stalks was easy to follow. They were all glowing with a strange blue light that seemed to fade slowly, like dying fireflies. Then he saw it. Half buried in the earth was something that looked like a teardrop made of metal. It was about the size of his pickup truck, but smoother than any vehicle he'd ever seen. Parts of it were glowing blue, but the light was flickering, like a dying battery. "Hello," David called out. "Is anyone there?" A soft groaning sound came from behind the ship. David moved closer, his heart pounding. There, lying in the dirt, was a woman, but she wasn't like any woman he'd ever seen. Her skin had a silvery glow, and her hair moved by itself, like it was floating in water. She was hurt. There was a cut on her arm that glowed purple instead of red. When she saw David, she tried to move away, but winced in pain. "Hey, it's okay," David said softly, the way he talked to scared animals. "I want to help." The woman said something, but it wasn't in any language David knew. It sounded like music mixed with wind chimes. She pointed at her ship, then at the sky, then made a crashing motion with her hands. "You crashed," David said, nodding. "I understand that part." He opened his first aid kit and held up a bandage. The woman looked at it curiously, then at her glowing wound. She shook her head and pulled something from a pocket in her strange clothes. It looked like a small crystal. She pressed it to her cut, and the crystal melted into her skin, healing the wound instantly. David's mouth fell open. "Okay, that's pretty cool." The woman smiled at his reaction. She pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Lyra. "Lyra," David repeated. "Is that your name?" She nodded excitedly and pointed at him. "I'm David," he said, touching his chest. "David," she tried, her voice making his simple name sound like a song. Suddenly, they heard sirens in the distance. Lyra's eyes went wide with fear. She tried to stand but stumbled. Without thinking, David caught her. "Those would be my nosy neighbors," he said. "Something tells me you don't want to meet them." Lyra didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. She looked at her ship, then at the approaching sirens, then back at David with worried eyes. David made a quick decision. "Your ship's not going anywhere tonight," he said. "But I have a barn. No one goes in there but me." He pointed to the big red barn in the distance, then mind walking and sleeping. Lyra looked unsure for a moment, but then more sirens joined the first ones. She nodded. David helped her walk to the barn. Inside, he quickly cleared a space in the hayloft, making a comfortable hiding spot. Just as he got Lyra settled, he heard cars pulling up to his house. "Stay here," he said, making a stay gesture like he used with Max. "I'll be back." As he turned to leave, Lyra caught his hand. When he looked back, she touched her chest and said "friend." It was the first English word she'd said. David smiled. "Yeah," he said, touching his own chest. "Friend." He hurried out to deal with whoever was coming, not knowing that this night would change his life forever. Behind him, hidden in the hayloft, Lyra watched him go, her purple eyes glowing softly in the dark. She didn't understand much about this strange world yet, but she understood one thing. She had found someone special. Over the next few weeks, David's farm became home to the strangest and most wonderful English lessons ever taught. Every morning, before the sun rose, he would sneak out to the barn with fresh clothes, food, and new words to teach Lyra. Lyra was the fastest learner David had ever met. She had a special way with languages. When she learned a new word, her eyes would glow brighter for a moment, like she was taking a picture of it in her mind. By the end of the first week, she could already make simple sentences. But it wasn't just Lyra who was learning. She taught David things too, in her own special way. One morning, she showed him how to make his coffee cup float. David spilled the coffee everywhere in surprise, making them both laugh. After that, floating objects became their secret morning game. They had their own special dictionary now. Lyra would draw pictures of things from her world, and David would draw what they were called on Earth. Her drawings showed amazing things: cities that floated in the clouds, plants that could walk and dance, and animals that could change colors like chameleons. One day, David found Lyra in the garden, crying. She had discovered his family photo album in the house. Pointing to the empty chairs in recent photos, she asked, "Where are they?" David's heart felt heavy. "They're gone," he said softly. "Car accident. 3 years ago." Lyra might not have understood all the words, but she understood loss. She took his hand and started humming. It wasn't like any song David had heard before. It seemed to paint pictures in his mind of stars being born and dying, of new stars taking their place. It was her people's song of remembrance, she later explained. After that day, something changed between them. They weren't just friends helping each other anymore. They were family, two lonely souls who had found each other across the stars. Lyra started helping around the farm in her own unique way. She could make the vegetables grow twice as fast with just a touch. The animals loved her, especially Max, who would bring her his favorite toys every morning. She even fixed David's old tractor using some strange crystal technology that made it run better than when it was new. But their peaceful days couldn't last forever. One evening, while they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Lyra safely hidden in the shadows, a black car drove slowly past the farm. Then another, and another. "Government people," David whispered. "They're still looking for whatever crashed here." Lyra's face grew serious. She took out a small device that looked like a compass made of crystal. The needle was pointing up at the sky, glowing brighter than before. "My people," she said softly. "They're coming closer. Looking for me." David felt his heart sink. He knew this day would come, but he wasn't ready. Not yet. "How long?" he asked. 3 days, Lyra said, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe 4. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one. Finally, Lyra spoke again, her voice stronger now. "David," she said, "I need to tell you something. Something important." But before she could continue, they saw more headlights approaching the farm. This time, they weren't just passing by. The cars were turning into his driveway. David jumped up. "Quick, get to the barn," he whispered urgently. As Lyra hurried away, she looked back at him with those beautiful purple eyes. There was something in them, something she wanted to say. But there was no time. The cars were getting closer, their headlights cutting through the evening darkness. Whatever Lyra wanted to tell him would have to wait. Right now, they had to make sure her secret stayed safe for just a few more days. Little did David know, Lyra's secret was bigger than anything he could have imagined, and it would change both their lives forever. That night, the moon was full and strange. It had a purple ring around it that David had never seen before. Lyra said it was a sign. Her people were closer than they thought. They didn't have 3 days anymore. They barely had 3 hours. David and Lyra worked quickly in the darkness of the barn. Her ship was still damaged, but she had been fixing it piece by piece over the past weeks. Now they just needed to move it from its hiding place under the hay. "What about the government people?" David asked, peeking through the barn doors at the dark road. Lyra pulled out a small silver ball from her pocket. "Watch," she said with a smile. She twisted the ball and threw it high into the air. It burst silently, releasing a shower of tiny lights that looked like fireflies. These lights spread out over the whole farm. "Light wall," she explained. They see only empty farm now. But it only works for 1 hour. As they uncovered her ship, David noticed something different about it. The metal wasn't just smooth anymore. It had patterns on it, like swirling waves that moved when you looked at them. Lyra had carved them herself, telling the story of her time on Earth. "It's beautiful," David said, touching one of the patterns. To his surprise, it glowed under his touch, and he could hear faint music. "Ship remembers you now," Lyra said softly. "We'll always remember." They worked together to push the ship out of the barn. Just then, Max started barking, but it wasn't his usual bark. It was his warning bark. David ran to the edge of the farm and saw them. A line of black cars approaching in the distance, their headlights off. They were trying to be sneaky this time. "Lyra, we need to hurry." But Lyra wasn't rushing. Instead, she was standing very still, holding something in her hands. It was David's mother's old silver locket, the one he had shown her when she asked about his family. "David," she said, her voice shaking. "I need this." "Take it," he said without hesitation. "But why?" Lyra opened her mouth to answer, but suddenly her crystal compass started buzzing. She looked up at the sky with wide eyes. "They're here." A different kind of light appeared in the sky, not the harsh headlights of government cars, but a soft, pulsing glow that seemed to call to Lyra. Her hair began floating more than usual, responding to some invisible signal. "I have to go," she said, tears making her purple eyes shimmer like stars. "But David, I leave you something too." She pressed her hand to her chest, then to his. For a moment, David felt a warm glow spread through his body. What was that? "Star touch," she explained quickly. "Now you can always feel when I'm thinking of you, like warm sunlight in your heart." The lights in the sky were getting brighter, and the government cars were getting closer. They were running out of time. Lyra ran to her ship but stopped at the door. She turned back one last time and said something in her language, a beautiful phrase that sounded like singing stars. "What does that mean?" David asked. She smiled through her tears. "You will know soon." The ship's door closed, and it rose silently into the air. Just as it disappeared into the clouds, the government cars burst through the firefly lights, breaking the illusion. But they were too late. All they found was David, standing alone in his field, one hand pressed to his chest, where a warm glow pulsed like a second heartbeat. What they didn't find was the small gift Lyra had left behind. Something that would change everything. Something that was, at that very moment, beginning to grow. The next morning, when the government people finally left, David found a strange mark on his barn roof, a pattern of swirling lines that glowed faintly in the dark. It looked like writing, but not in any language from Earth. He smiled, knowing it was a message from Lyra, one that he would understand when the time was right. He touched his chest again, feeling that warm glow. Somewhere up there among the stars, he knew Lyra was thinking of him too. But he had no idea just how soon their paths would cross again, or the amazing surprise that was waiting in their future. Present day, on Lyra's home planet, Celestia. "Mama, why do my eyes change colors when I feel things?" 5-year-old Sky sat on a crystal bench that grew from the living floor of their home, watching their reflection in a floating mirror. Right now, their eyes were swirling with curious green, like Earth's northern lights. Lyra smiled, touching the silver locket she always wore. "Because you're special, little star. You're a bridge between two worlds." Their home was high in one of Celestia's floating cities, where buildings grew like crystal trees and the sky was always painted with 3 moons. But Sky's favorite thing wasn't the floating gardens or the color-changing clouds. It was the special room Mama had made just for them. Earth Room, Sky called it. One wall was covered with David's drawings from their picture dictionary. Another had photos Lyra had taken secretly during her time on Earth. There was even a real plant from David's farm, a sunflower that Lyra had preserved in a crystal dome. It still moved to follow the light, just like it had on Earth. Tell me about Daddy again, Sky said, making the floating mirror dance with a wave of their hand. This was a new power that had appeared last week, the ability to move things without touching them, just like Mama could. Lyra sat beside Sky, and a crystal bench grew wider to accommodate them both. She pulled out a small device that looked like a seashell and pressed it. Immediately, the room filled with holograms of David's farm. Your father, Lyra began, is the kindest human I've ever met. When my ship crashed, he didn't call the authorities. He helped me instead. He taught me Earth words, and I taught him about the stars. And then you fell in love, Sky added, their eyes turning pink with happiness. Yes, Lyra smiled. But I didn't know I was carrying you until I was already back home. You were our beautiful surprise. Sky touched the hologram of the farm, making ripples in the light. Why didn't we go back right away? Lyra's face grew serious. It wasn't safe. The Earth government was looking for signs of our people, and you, my little star, were growing up with some very special gifts. It was true. Sky wasn't like other children on Celestia or Earth. They could breathe both Earth's air and Celestia's silver atmosphere. Their skin could shift between human-like and the silvery glow of Celestians. They could understand any language they heard, and most amazingly, they could make plants grow just by laughing. But now it's time, Lyra said, standing up. She waved her hand, and the wall parted to reveal her ship. The patterns David had touched still moved across its surface, playing their soft music. You're old enough to control your powers, and the Earth government has stopped looking for us. Sky jumped up excitedly, their eyes turning bright gold. We're going to meet Daddy. Yes, but first. Lyra touched the silver locket, and it opened to reveal not photos, but a small crystal. This is a memory crystal. It holds something very special. The moment I realized I was carrying you. Would you like to see? Sky nodded eagerly. Lyra placed the crystal between them, and it projected a scene. Lyra, back on Celestia, in a medical room. A doctor was showing her a scan of tiny Sky, and there was something amazing about it. The baby was surrounded by both silver Celestian light and golden Earth energy, forming a perfect spiral, like the two worlds were dancing together. The doctors said you were impossible, Lyra said softly. A child of two worlds had never existed before. But there you were, proving that love knows no boundaries, not even between stars. Sky touched the projection, their eyes shifting to deep blue with wonder. Is that why I can do things other kids can't? Yes. And there's something else you should know. Lyra pressed her hand to the ship's surface, and new patterns appeared. Your father doesn't know about you yet, but every day since I left, I felt his heart through the star touch we shared. He's been waiting, hoping we'd return. What if? Sky's eyes turned purple with worry, just like their mother's. What if he doesn't like me? Lyra hugged Sky close. Your father has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met in any world, and you, my little star, are the best of both worlds. Ready to go meet him? Sky took a deep breath and nodded. Their eyes settled into a new color, a perfect blend of Earth's blue and Celestia's purple. As they boarded the ship, Sky had one more question. Mama, what was that special thing you wanted to tell Daddy before you left? Lyra smiled mysteriously. I wanted to tell him about the impossible thing that was starting to grow inside me, a tiny spark of love between Earth and stars. But now, she touched Sky's cheek gently. You can tell him yourself. The ship rose into Celestia's rainbow sky, ready to carry its precious cargo back to Earth. And somewhere, in a small town on a blue planet, David Anderson felt a sudden warmth in his chest, stronger than ever before, because this time, two hearts were reaching out to him across the stars. The door opened, and time seemed to stop. David Anderson stood there, 5 years older but with the same kind eyes. He was wearing his favorite old blue flannel shirt, now a bit more faded. For a moment, he just stared, his hand frozen on the doorknob. Lyra's heart was beating so fast she could barely breathe. Sky squeezed her hand tightly, their eyes shifting through colors like a rainbow. Blue, gold, purple, and back again. "Lyra," David whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Is it really you?" Before she could answer, something extraordinary happened. The old sunflowers in David's garden suddenly turned toward them and burst into bloom, even though it was evening. Sky giggled in surprise, their powers responding to their excitement. David's eyes moved to Sky, and his breath caught. The child was beautiful, with features that perfectly blended both worlds. But what made his heart stop was when Sky's eyes settled into the exact same shade of green as his mother's, the woman in the family photo Sky had never met but somehow channeled. "Hi, Daddy," Sky said softly in perfect English. "I like your sunflowers." David stepped forward, his legs shaky. "How?" He looked at Lyra, then back at Sky. Then his hand went to his chest, to the spot where Lyra had given him the star touch 5 years ago. It was glowing visibly now, right through his shirt. "I felt it," he said wonderingly. "All this time, I felt something growing stronger in the star touch. It wasn't just you coming back, was it, Lyra? It was both of you." Lyra nodded, tears making her purple eyes shimmer. "Remember last thing I want to tell you. Before ships came." Understanding dawned on David's face. He knelt down to Sky's level, and something magical happened. The star touch in his chest reached out with golden light, meeting the silver glow that had started shining from Sky's heart. Where the lights met, they formed a spiral of gold and silver, just like in Sky's baby scan. "Our impossible miracle," Lyra said softly. "Child of earth and stars." Sky looked at their glowing chest in wonder. "Mama, look, just like in your memory crystal." Suddenly, Max, now an older dog but still full of love, came bounding out of the house. But instead of barking, he stopped and stared at Sky. Then, to everyone's amazement, all the neighborhood dogs started howling a strange musical howl that sounded almost like Lyra's people songs. "They remember," Lyra explained. "Animals here always knew I was different. Now they sing welcome song to Sky." David laughed, tears in his eyes. "Your mother used to make my coffee float just to see me spill it. What can you do, little one?" Sky grinned and raised their hands. All around them, David's garden came to life. Flowers bloomed out of season, vines danced like ribbons, and a small apple tree suddenly sprouted and grew until it bore a single perfect apple. Sky plucked it from the air and offered it to David. "I can grow things with happy thoughts," Scott explained. "And sometimes, when I dream, I can see both worlds at once." "Oh, and watch this." Sky closed their eyes in concentration, and their appearance began to shift. Their skin took on the subtle silver glow of their mother's people, then shifted back to look fully human, then settled into a perfect blend of both. "Amazing," David breathed. Then he did something that made Sky's eyes turn bright pink with joy. He opened his arms wide. Sky practically flew into the hug. The moment they touched, all of David's old wind chimes started playing by themselves, creating a melody that sounded like a blend of Earth's music and Celestian songs. "Welcome home," David whispered, holding his child close. Then he looked up at Lyra, his eyes full of love and wonder. "Both of you." But their beautiful moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. Lyra tensed, recognizing the sound of government cars. Sky's eyes turned worried purple, just like their mother's. David stood up, still holding Sky, and did something unexpected. He smiled. "Don't worry," he said, reaching for Lyra's hand. "A lot has changed in 5 years. I have something to show you both." He led them inside, just as the cars turned onto his street. But instead of black government vehicles, they were regular cars, filled with familiar faces. The entire town had come to welcome home their own impossible family. In that moment, Sky's eyes turned a new color that no one had ever seen before, the exact shade of a sunset seen from both Earth and Celestia at the same time. It was the color of belonging to two worlds, and finally having them come together. The whole town gathered in David's backyard that evening, creating the strangest and most wonderful welcome home party ever seen on Earth. Mrs. Thompson brought her famous apple pie. Sky touched it curiously, and suddenly every apple in it turned into a different color of the rainbow, each one tasting like a different sweet memory. "This one tastes like Mama's first sunrise on Earth," Sky announced, biting into a purple apple. "And this gold one tastes like Daddy's laugh." The townspeople watched in wonder as Sky ran around, their excitement making flowers bloom with every step. But what amazed them most was when Sky started telling stories. Because when Sky told stories, they appeared in the air like living paintings made of starlight. "See, this is Mama's home," Sky said, creating a shimmering image of Celestia's crystal cities, floating in a triple moonlit sky. "And these are the rainbow clouds that sing when it rains." David couldn't stop smiling, even when he saw the government cars finally arrive. But these weren't the same scary black cars from 5 years ago. These were different, and so were the people who stepped out. "Mr. Anderson," said a woman in a blue suit, smiling warmly. "We've been expecting this day." She explained that after 5 years of watching David's farm, they'd seen how his crops grew twice as fast, how his animals never got sick, and how the night sky above his land seemed to dance with strange lights. But instead of fear, they'd found wonder. "We don't want to study or capture anyone," she said, looking at Lyra and Sky. "We want to learn, to understand, to be ready when more of your people come." Sky, who had been listening while making tiny constellations dance around their fingers, suddenly gasped. Their eyes turned silver, a new color they'd never shown before. "Mama, the star paths are aligning." Lyra looked up at the evening sky, her purple eyes wide. "The great crossing is coming. Time when Earth and Celestia paths cross in space. It happens every 100 years, Sky explained excitedly to everyone. "When the stars make a bridge between worlds." The government woman's eyes lit up. "That's why you came back now. You're not just here for a visit, are you?" Lyra took David's hand. "Earth and Celestia are ready to meet, but need bridge first. Family that belongs to both worlds." "Us," Sky said simply, their eyes swirling with both Earth's blue and Celestia's purple. "We're the first bridge." David looked at his impossible family, the alien woman he loved and their miracle child who could touch both worlds. Then he looked at his farm, his home for all his life. But before he could say anything, Sky ran to the old barn. Look what's happening." The mysterious message Lyra had left on the barn roof 5 years ago was glowing. As everyone watched, the alien writing began to change, forming new patterns that even David could read. 2 worlds, 1 heart, no more apart. Sky placed their hands on the barn wall, and something extraordinary happened. The entire building began to transform. The wood turned crystalline, but kept its warm, earthy feel. It became a perfect blend of Earth and Celestian architecture, a physical bridge between worlds. "I didn't know I could do that," Sky exclaimed, their eyes wide with surprise. "Because you needed both your Earth and Celestian family together," Lyra explained softly. "Now you complete." The government woman stepped forward. "Mr. Anderson, we would be honored if you and your family would help us prepare Earth for the Great Crossing. Your farm could be the first embassy between our worlds." David looked at his transformed barn, then at the townspeople who had accepted his strange, wonderful family. Finally, he looked at Lyra and Sky. "I don't need to choose between worlds," he said, understanding at last. "My world is wherever you both are." Sky's eyes lit up with pure joy, creating a shower of tiny stars that floated down like snow. Each star held a different memory. Lyra's crash, David's kindness, their love story, Sky's birth among the stars, and now, their reunion. As the stars fell, they didn't fade away. Instead, they took root in the earth, sprouting into new flowers never seen before on either world, blossoms that glowed like starlight but smelled like Earth's sweetest gardens. "Sky flowers," Sky laughed, dancing among them. Now everyone can have a piece of both worlds. The townspeople gathered around, marveling at these new flowers. Children played with Sky, learning to float fallen leaves in the air. Adults talked with Lyra about Celestian culture, while the government team excitedly planned for the upcoming crossing of worlds. And in the middle of it all, David held his family close, feeling the star touch glowing strong and warm in all their hearts. Above them, the first stars of evening appeared, twinkling with new meaning. Soon, they would be more than just stars. They would be bridges, connecting two worlds that had been separate for far too long. All because one alien crashed in a kind human's cornfield, and their love created something impossible. A child of Earth and stars, who taught both worlds that the best families are the ones we choose, and the best bridges are built by love.